So good evening, everyone. How are you?
Okay.
Welcome to the Alpha-Gal Syndrome Symposium. My name is Aaron Hall, and I represent TaJ Media Productions, TajTalk.com, and we are very happy to have you all here. This evening, we will look to discuss what Alpha-Gal is, to define how to deal with it, how to combat it, and to have deliverables on what next steps would be in order to overcome this. There are many moving parts to this evening. We're happy to have you all here. This could not be happening if it was not for Miss Beth Harrison Vanderheit and Miss Jennifer Platt. They have really put their energy into making this happen. So without any further ado, Jennifer and Beth, why don't you take it away?
All right, thank you, Aaron. And thanks everybody for being here tonight in person and dialing in around the world. This really means a lot to all of us in the Alpha-Gal community. So first, what we want to do is just go over a little bit about Jennifer and I individually so that you have a familiarity with us, and then we'll get into the layout of the presentation and start introducing the speakers, okay? So a little background about me. I have been most of my career in operations management and project management in the finance world and business and finance. I'm married. I have 3 boys. We live in Massachusetts, and I've got a little place in southern Maine. Sometimes you'll see me share information about it. It's a place I love dearly. And unfortunately, up there, we are starting to see a problem with the Lone Star tick. Massachusetts, that whole New England area, is a hotspot for Lyme disease, and unfortunately 3 in my family have had Lyme disease. I'm one of the 3. My son was diagnosed twice. 4 out of 5 of us in my household have life-threatening food allergies, so we're very familiar with what anaphylaxis and ingredient detective work that we have to do every day. After years of dealing with that, between tick-borne conditions and food allergies, I felt inspired to change my career and go back to school to become a certified integrative nutrition health coach. And I did that through one of our sponsors, the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. And so while I was in school, I was actively involved with a very active Alpha-Gal support group. I remain so. And that group became involved with the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group, which is a group appointed in the United States to help oversee some of the gaps and things that we need to work on in the country regarding tick-borne conditions, or diseases as it was defined originally, which is now expanding, thankfully. And through that whole experience, it became really apparent to me there was a real need for credible information for everyone, not just the healthcare practitioners and EMS and things like that. So that was really the genesis of starting Tick-Borne Conditions United. So that's a little bit about me. And Jennifer, you want to get into a little bit about you?
So my firsthand experience with tick-borne illnesses started back in 2011 when I was working on my doctorate in public health, and I contracted ehrlichiosis, which is one of the lesser-known tick-borne conditions. And of course, being in public health, I knew that ticks were bad and that you really didn't want to get sick, but man, I would not wish that disease on anybody. It was so awful. And I lost literally 3 months of functionality. And later they diagnosed some other coexisting infections, Lyme and Babesia. So a couple of years after that, I did get my doctorate finally. And I did some work with the health department here in Chatham County. And one of the first things that we did was a survey of exposure to tick-borne ticks and illnesses. And that was a survey that we did locally because we wanted to compare it to some national results that the CDC had and start getting a glimpse of what things looked like in this county. We thought we knew, but we really wanted to start down the road to get better information. And about a year after that, that survey ended up being focus group research, because about a year after that I decided to take an entrepreneurial spin to my career, and I started a company called Tick Warriors, and we'll talk about them in a little bit. They're a sponsor tonight. And when I started that company is when I really started getting earfuls of stories from people everywhere. I have booths or go out to meet clients, or even just being in the grocery store, people would stop and tell me, and that's what happens when you live in a small town. So you get this firsthand information, and several of my friends also had alpha-gal, and in an effort to learn more about what was really going on with alpha-gal, my scientific side really wanted to understand what the patient experience was starting to accumulate in terms of stories and shared experiences. So I found some Facebook groups and started watching them, and that's where I eventually met Beth, who was one of the administrators of one of the groups. I did some work with the Chatham County Health Department, and we're very excited to have here this evening the health director here in Chatham County, Leighton Long. And Leighton has spent nearly 30 years in public health here in the state. And he didn't really know what he was getting into 4.5 years ago when he decided to come to Chatham County. After he made the announcement, one of his colleagues quickly called him and said, "You know that's the tick hotspot of the state, don't you?" And he didn't. But he quickly learned firsthand. Leighton has had a very successful career and is doing great things with the county in terms of advancing education and awareness about tick-borne illnesses. Last year, he was named the state health director in the state. He got the award for that, and so I'm just really excited you're here, able to join us tonight.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate the opportunity to come and that you and Beth have put this together and get information out. One of the things that public health focuses on is a key cornerstone of what we do in our work is prevention, and that is something that we try to focus on in the department. Jennifer alluded to my experience with ticks, and I've always been an outdoors person. Growing up in North Carolina, early years I hunted, I've always fished. Growing up, we're aware of the brown dog tick, that our mothers warned us about, and we always watched and checked for on the occasional episode that we might find one on us. But as time progressed, and particularly when I moved into this region of the state, I began to see more and more tick issues that I had never seen before, and becoming very familiar with the fact that you have to take a lot of precautions when you go out, even in your yard. I know a lot of people that say they have been bit many times, and even myself, when I go out and work in the yard, I spray permethrin on me. We actually have staff in the health department that do a lot of field work, and we actually purchase permethrin-treated clothes for them. It's to that extent. We actually had that discussion Tuesday. We also have animal services in our department, and also looking at the possibility of getting them clothes treated with that. And I've known people with various tick-borne illnesses, including alpha-gal, and it can be a devastating illness. And so what we try to focus on is getting the message out about prevention, because ticks are just a part of the environment today, like at levels that I've never understood since I've been a health director here and in some regions of the state where I talk to my colleagues, and they're experiencing the same thing. So the focus, and I think this is a great opportunity with so many folks listening in, to get the word out about taking every precaution possible to avoid getting bitten by ticks, so you don't have to suffer one of these illnesses. Some of the things that we're doing, and the Board of Health has become very interested in this subject, and has asked the health department to begin working on various projects around surveying, which we've done some of those surveys around community college and got some information. it's some convenient samples, so the statistics of it are not not necessarily reliable, but it does indicate that we are seeing more of it. And some of it, I think we did about 400, got about 400 responses, and of those, maybe 1% or so, maybe a little more, were saying they actually had alpha-gal, and there was other tick-borne illnesses associated in those surveys. So it's increasing the awareness of it is what I really want to see happen in the community. So one of the things that we did recently, and Jennifer was part of that, was having a tick symposium. We actually brought in some experts from around the state and some other parts of the country to talk about ticks, the diseases, some of the studies that are going on. I think that's really an issue that we really need to delve into, is why are we seeing so many more ticks? Is there anything that can be done about it? Are there environmental changes that are going on that are causing this? As part of our overall strategy to deal with it. And at the end of the day, working and getting people informed about that a tick bite is not necessarily just a nuisance. It can be a life debilitating event if you get the wrong tick. Other things that we're doing in the department, we give away the tick kits. I think anybody that's been to a presentation or that Environmental Health Office has done, or some of the things that we've done, we give away tick kits. It has a little information. It's a little small canvas like pouch, and it's got a little pair of tweezers with a built-in magnifying glass and antiseptic and information about ticks. So if you have any interest in that, you can contact the China County Health Department and we can help you with that. So anyway, I'm glad to be here and appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to everybody. And I'm going to turn it over. And if you have any questions for the health department, we're right here in Pittsburgh, so glad to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies, so much. I really appreciate you coming. And another organization in the state that is very active is known as TIC-North Carolina. And unfortunately, they could not be here tonight, but they gave us a statement to read. And for those of you that are here in person, I encourage you to pick up one of their brochures out in the lobby as you're leaving, if you haven't already. So here's the statement, and it was written by Dr. Marcia Herman Giddens, who is the science advisor for the organization. The Tick-Borne Infections Council of North Carolina is a nonprofit organization working to improve the recognition, treatment, control, and understanding of tick-borne diseases and conditions in North Carolina since 2005. One of our goals is to educate the public, medical and veterinary professionals, school health nurses, and the public health system about tick-borne diseases in North Carolina, including risk factors, emerging infections, and prevention. In the U.S., alpha-gal syndrome, an allergy rather than a disease, is associated with the bite of a Lone Star tick. It is one of many tick-borne phenomena discovered since our organization was founded 13 years ago. We are still learning about alpha-gal syndrome. From the number of calls and emails we get from people who have recently developed an allergy to mammalian products and meat, we can attest to the increase in cases. We assume this is happening across the expanding geographic area that Lone Star ticks inhabit. Over the last 10 years or so, Lone Star ticks have expanded their territory as far west as Nebraska and into Canada. Reports in medical literature about AGS are now appearing from our Northeast, and Canada has just published their first AGS study. AGS is now yet another serious tick-related public health problem. We appreciate the contribution of this symposium in making medical providers and the public more aware of alpha-gal and in helping increase knowledge about this condition.
So important. So, obviously the things you've heard already and the things that have brought you here today, you can recognize that there's a growing, problem. And the good news is that there is an equally growing momentum in the country here in the United States to really understand what's going on with the ticks and how, to develop better diagnostic tools and research and things of that nature. And, in the words of one of the gentlemen on the tick-borne disease working group here in the United States, he says, we can't educate physicians and public without sound scientific information. So, this is exactly what this evening is about, is to bring some of those experts to you so that you can hear from them, the original source and continued research and education for us all. So let's see. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over.
That's one of the main reasons we created Tick-Borne Conditions United. Mm-hmm. And because there is that significant lack of awareness when it comes to alpha-gal syndrome, it was really urgent to us to have that as the topic tonight for our first webinar. Obviously, we won't be able to address the many facets of alpha-gal tonight, but we want this symposium to be one of many first steps that are underway to elevate the conversation. Tonight, we've asked internationally recognized experts and patients to share insights with us. What do we know about alpha-gal? How do we empower those listening to obtain accurate information? And what messages would we like those of you who are listening to take away from this gathering? In the words of one of our speakers, educate, empower, encourage patients to learn to live safely with this condition, and empowered patients also and loved ones to join groups and help to collectively increase awareness so that we can all work together to ensure that alpha-gal syndrome patients can safely learn what is their new normal. Tonight's presentation is being recorded with the intention that it will serve as one of the go-to resources for people first learning about the syndrome and its implications for healthcare providers, patients, educators, first responders, pharmacists, moms, dads, grandparents, neighbors.
So tonight's presentation is going to consist of 3 different parts. First, we have 2 highly recognized physicians, Dr. Cheryl Van Noonen from Australia and Dr. Tina Merritt, both physicians and researchers, and one of which also is coincidentally diagnosed with alpha-gal. Secondly, we have patients from 3 different continents who will share their experiences about alpha-gal syndrome, and then we'll have an opportunity for a third part, our Q&A, which is really exciting. Those in the audience as well as audience online, you'll be able to address the speakers with your questions. Now, I would like to introduce to everybody Dr. Tina Merritt, who is an allergist immunologist in Bentonville, Arkansas. And Dr. Merritt was on the team that discovered the relationship between alpha-gal and the cetuximab cancer drug here in the United States. And interestingly enough, as I said, she is the one of the physicians that's been diagnosed with alpha-gal as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tina.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
There we go.
Okay. So alpha-gal was first described in Australia, I believe it was 40 years ago. And in 2008, we published an article in the New England Journal of Medicine when we found an association with a cancer drug causing anaphylactic reactions. And the cancer drug had alpha-gal on it. And Dr. Platts Mills in Virginia was asked to develop a test for this allergy in 2004 for Clone, the company that was making the cancer drug. And there were 4 patients that had anaphylactic reactions, and 4 of the samples came back positive. And then the test kind of fell to the wayside. But then when they got their FDA approval, there were more cases of anaphylaxis. And a patient in Bentonville, Arkansas, actually passed away from the first infusion of this cancer medicine. So we developed the test again around 2006, and it was one of the physicians doing research at Clone that figured out that it was alpha-gal. And then since that time, we hypothesized that alpha-gal is caused by a tick bite, and that was found by Dr. Platts Mills in Virginia. He actually was one of the original people that showed up allergic to the cancer drug. And when he was bitten by several baby seed ticks, he developed a very high IgE to alpha-gal. And he called and said, "Are you allergic to beef and pork?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "It's ticks." I said, "No, it's not." And yes, it is. So we developed the test for IgE to alpha-gal in the U.S. And in the past year, according to Viracor Eurofins, the company that does most of the tests, there were 14,500 positive alpha-gal tests last year. And a positive is anything above 0.10 for the amount of IgE antibody. And then these reactions were occurring across the Mid-South, from Virginia and North Carolina over to Arkansas and Missouri, but now they are spreading. And on Facebook there is a Z-map where people put a pin if they have alpha-gal, and it's spreading up the East Coast. It's going north. They are seeing a lot more in Michigan and northern states. There's a few in California. 2 of them are actually my patients that moved from this area. And then the reactions seem to be associated with mainly the Lone Star tick, but we theorize that it's also other insects possibly. In other countries, it's different ticks, and I know Dr. Van Noonen will talk more about that. And then with the test, it can be done in the United States mainly through Viracor Eurofins laboratory. And it can be also done through several of the commercial laboratories, like Quest, Mayo Clinic, LabCorp. They usually send to that one particular lab. Dr. Platts-Mills' lab has also done the IgE to alpha-gal, and they have 3,600 positive tests, I believe. But the theory is that the Lone Star tick bites a person, and then they become allergic. It can be anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 months after the tick bite that they develop symptoms. The symptoms can be anywhere from urticaria, which is hives, to gastrointestinal symptoms, to full-blown anaphylaxis. And sometimes even the first reaction that's obvious is full-blown anaphylaxis. And the amount of IgE doesn't seem to matter with this particular allergy. I've had patients have to be resuscitated and they had a 0.25 IgE to alpha-gal. I have had patients that theirs were as high as 300 IgE to alpha-gal, and they anaphylaxed to things that we didn't think contained mammal products, such as a flu vaccine that was grown in pork DNA. So this is a very unusual allergy. It's the first time we've described an allergy to a carbohydrate. It's on mammal cells except humans and high rapes. And its distribution, we feel like is through mostly the Mid-South. I mentioned the cut point for this test is 0.10. Can we go to the next slide? The Mid-South is where the most concentration is. This next slide is actually from Eurofins Viracor, and they show like a 49%. What that is with a positive history, when we send in samples, 49% came back positive. We theorize that it's actually 22% of people, just controls even, came back positive for IgE to alpha-gal in the original clinical trial. And then the next slide is that Z-map where patients put a pin where they are located that have IgE to alpha-gal. And it is concentrated mostly in the middle part of the country, but it is spreading. And it's in several other countries. My next slide is mainly Arkansas, because in Arkansas we actually have an alpha-gal task force that was started by Representative Julie Mayberry. She went to the House of Representatives and figured out that 2 of them had alpha-gal. And she said, well, what were the chances of 2 out of 100 people having this allergy? And she had had anaphylaxis 6 times before they figured out what the cause of her reactions were. And then the next case slide is showing how many positive tests they've had. So at Eurofins Viracor, they've theorized that they have 58,000 positive tests. Now this is over several years, since 2009, and this is also duplicates. Like I measure this on my patients every year when we can. My best estimate is that there's 14,500 positive tests in a year here, and then Dr. Platts-Mills has 3,600, but some of those are also duplicates. Sometimes we send to both laboratories. And I mentioned the symptoms can be anywhere, from hives to full-blown anaphylaxis. And the problem with this allergy is it can be delayed. It can be 2 hours, it can be 10 hours after someone has eaten either beef or pork or even gelatin. So some patients are so sensitive they can't have gelatin, they can't have any mammal products in their medications. There's something called magnesium stearate that is the binder that's usually from a mammal source. And the problem in the US is they're not labeling these products for mammal content. And so that's something we are trying to do with the FDA, but we do need people to report their reactions to the FDA, whether it's to medicine or foods, so that they can realize that this is a significant problem. Also, we're finding that natural flavoring, we don't know what that is in different products. Some restaurants add mammal fat to their grease. Some patients are so sensitive to milk that even when something says non-dairy, they're reacting to the casein or the whey, which is the protein in milk, but also milk has lactose, which breaks into galactose. So I've found that about half of my patients with alpha-gal allergy are also allergic to milk. And then I believe my next slide, I don't know if you have that up. I had a slide in here that was about the things that we can eat. So we can usually eat poultry, we can usually eat fish and seafood, unless there's another allergy that develops. The things we can't eat include anything from a mammal. So beef, pork, venison. I've had a patient that didn't know venison was a mammal. So we have to be very careful about what we eat. And then with the milk products, a lot of times it's hidden in several of our foods. And then with avoidance, we also have to avoid the medicines I've mentioned. We have to be careful with the vaccines because they usually have gelatin or they can be made with mammal products. Sometimes with supplements, they can be gelatin capsules, but also they can be derived from mammals. So like pancreatic enzymes, some of the thyroid medicines, like in America, a lot of patients use Armour thyroid, which is actually from a pig thyroid. And then some of our medicines that we use in the hospital. So we have to be careful if we have to go to the hospital that our medicines like heparin, which usually comes from a mammal, that we aren't receiving those medicines. So I usually recommend getting a medical alert bracelet if you do have this allergy. And then some patients are very sensitive to other products, like Julie Mayberry was sensitive to lanolin in her husband's Carmex, and he would kiss her and she'd start coughing. And it took her a while to figure out that it was the lanolin in that product. Some patients even break out to just contact with leather if they're very sensitive. And then lotions, soaps, detergents, shampoos, we have to try and find vegan forms of these products, and it's very difficult. And then we do have a lot of resources now. There's several support groups on the internet. Some of them are international, some of them are local. Even in my area, we have like 6 local, within Missouri, Arkansas, and Oklahoma, we have 6 local chapters, and so that's very good. There's also several articles in the press now about alpha-gal. So in the U.S., I feel like there's probably 14,500 positive patients at least. That's on testing, but there's probably many more patients that have this and don't know it. So I think it's very important to educate. Right now, the only treatment is to avoid these products and these foods. And then there's some other theories about what causes this. It could be associated with infections, and a lot of doctors don't look for tick-borne infections, and I think that's important to do as well. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Tina. I hope everybody learned something new from Tina's presentation. It was definitely action-packed. Tina, on the note of where you were sharing about, the different products and all, if anybody has any vegan shampoo, because I forgot mine. And
I know I worked so hard to make sure she had her own pan and her own cutting utensils so we wouldn't have any cross-contamination.
Yeah.
But I didn't think about the shampoo.
I know, and apparently I didn't either, so oops. So on that note, learning some new information about alpha-gal. There's another very large event being planned and underway with the coordination of Lisa Martin. It's going to be held on August 25th in Martinsville, Virginia.
Which is only 2 hours from here. On the calendars.
So you can find out more information if you go to tbcunited.com or tbcunited.com. We'll have this posted here, and any other alpha-gal groups or any other tick-borne conditions. If you're having any events that you'd like us to broadcast, please send that in to tick-borne-conditions-united@gmail.com, and we'll get that added on to our website for you. Okay.
And for those of you that are here in person, we printed out a whole bunch of flyers, so please take one for yourself and then anybody else you think might benefit from knowing about it, as well as your doctor's offices and educators and some of those many categories that we mentioned. And so now we're going to shift over to talk about the patient's experiences with alpha-gal, and Tina did a great job of talking about some of those many avenues of exposure, and we wanted to spend some time talking with 3 different patients who have alpha-gal and get just a snippet of a day in the life for them. And that conversation is going to be led by Jennifer Burton, who actually lives in Northwest Arkansas. And after 6 months of unexplained allergic reactions and 4 episodes of anaphylaxis, she saw Dr. Tina Merritt, who diagnosed her with alpha-gal in April of 2017. In August of 2017, she founded a local support group and advocacy group called the Alpha-Gal Encouragers. Jennifer is going to lead off with a broad overview, and then we'll talk about, we've got experiences from a couple other patients as well.
I'm so glad you could join us this evening to learn more about alpha-gal syndrome and a view through the eyes of some patients. I was diagnosed in April 2017 after about 6 months of battling the common escalating reactions from AGS: extreme fatigue, joint pain, rashes, GI distress, bloating, vomiting, diarrhea, angioedema, urticaria, and 4 anaphylactic episodes, the last one nearly fatal. That was when my husband insisted our primary care doctor do something because he wasn't going to watch me die. The doctor finally ordered food blood panel and 2 EpiPens, but when the results came back, they didn't make any sense. Suddenly, I was highly allergic to beef and dairy. She had no idea why, and simply sent me to a list of allergists. Just before my appointment, my supervisor shared a podcast he'd heard on alpha-gal. It was unbelievable. Are you kidding me? I really am allergic to beef, and it's all because of a tick bite? That's insane. I was shocked after Dr. Merritt reviewed my new patient's package and said, "So, you want to talk about alpha-gal? Do you think that's what it is?" I asked. She replied, "I know that's what it is. I've had it for over 30 years. What a blessing. Someone, my doctor, who understood what I've been going through. Untold numbers of us are misdiagnosed and suffer for months, years, or even tens of years with no diagnosis. In an attempt to control unknown idiopathic reactions, most doctors prescribe medications with mammal byproducts in them, which only compounds the reactions. Just like my doctor, they had no idea what their patients are reacting to or why. Even when properly diagnosed, most doctors and pharmacists think that we only have allergic reactions when we ingest mammalian meats. They simply tell their patients don't eat beef or pork, and in a year or 2 it'll go away. They either don't know or don't consider any other possible triggers because only contain trace amounts of mammal. Yet no one would ever give a person with a peanut allergy a single peanut. It's no different for us. Traces of mammal can keep our systems constantly agitated and even trigger a fatal reaction. During that first visit, Dr. Merritt warned me about dairy, cheese, pets, mascara, cosmetics, shampoos, conditioners, bath, body, hand soaps, and lotions, medications, supplements, gelatin, and gel pads. The list seemed endless. Then she recommended I go to Facebook and join an alpha-gal support group and learn all I could from them. The diagnosis, devastating. Its implications, overwhelming. Over a year later, grocery shopping, reading labels, and doing AGS research still consumes me. Vitamin D3, the bovine calcium and gelatin capsules for my osteoporosis, medications and vaccines, almost everything has some sort of beef, pork, or dairy byproduct in it. Even Benadryl, what I used for my allergic reactions and anaphylactic episodes, has magnesium stearate, which is usually mammal source. Mammal and dairy byproducts are concealed in so many ways, using so many hidden names. Trying to learn and avoid them isn't just daunting, it's seemingly impossible. A proper diagnosis is an enormous learning curve in order to stay safe and reaction-free. A proper diagnosis is truly life-altering. About 50% of us react to dairy products, about 30% to the fumes from cooking mammal meats from charcoal fires. Research studies are finally confirming what patients have known for years. The gelatin and mammal byproducts in vaccines, medications, and supplements can cause us to have a fatal allergic reaction, just like that single peanut. And there's cross-contamination from grills or utensils. Forget that favorite restaurant. It could land you in the hospital a few hours later. And be sure to consider the routine doctor and dentist visits and the products they use. Heaven forbid an emergency surgery or sutures. Everything has to be vetted. Does it contain some sort of mammal? Even then, doctors, dentists, and surgeons simply don't believe it's a necessary precaution to take. Then there's the isolation, anger, and depression we go through, the broken marriages because spouses can't cope, protecting the children diagnosed with AGS, dealing with family and friends who either forget or sneak a little bit of bacon grease, milk, or butter into that recipe and then watch you as you battle with the swelling and the hives, saying, oh no, I forgot, but it was just a little bit. Or surely you can go out and eat with us. They'll have chicken or something you can eat. As I mentioned earlier, many of us are told it'll eventually go away. Personally, I can't tell you how many well-meaning friends and family have told me the good news. At least it's temporary and it'll go away. How I wish reporters would stop reporting that as if it's gospel. The top experts now say it may go into remission in 2 to 5 years if we avoid all mammal sources and if we avoid being bitten by ticks again. But there's no guarantees. Just like Dr. Merritt, many have lived without the gal for decades. Current estimates are approximately 1 in 300 may go into remission, and in many of those, alpha-gal may still return within a year or more, with or without another tick bite. There is no cure or treatment, only avoiding mammal sources. I could go on for hours. We all could, but there are more stories to be heard and much more information that needs to be shared. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jennifer, very much. And with that, I have Jeannie Swain sitting right next to me. She came all the way from Pittsburgh, North Carolina to be here. And she's going to tell us about a day in the life of her life as an alpha-gal.
So I can remember the first time I heard about alpha-gal, I had a friend who told me that she was allergic to beef and pork, and I secretly laughed at her. I thought she was completely crazy and that this was like the new fad allergy that everybody was going to have, because there's no way that you're going to be allergic to beef and pork. Fast forward to September 2016 when I got a diagnosis that I indeed had alpha-gal as well. Prior to that, I had 2 episodes that were many months apart where I woke up in the middle of the night, was violently sick, GI sick, throwing up, similar to what I would think food poisoning is like, except that my hands and feet started itching, and then I broke out in hives all over my body. And like a very smart person, I did not go to the doctor. They were so far apart, and I thought, oh, well, it's just that random thing I had tonight. It's no big deal. I won't eat it again, or I won't drink it again. I'll be totally fine. And then I started developing tongue swelling, and I went to an allergist. Thankfully, I first saw an allergist who knew about alpha-gal, and so immediately when I came in, he knew what I had. So many people with alpha-gal spend years trying to figure out what they're allergic to, or have doctors who have never heard of alpha-gal before. So I was very lucky I got that diagnosis right away. But I've really spent the next 2 years in pretty bad health. I was 36 when I was diagnosed. I've never had any kind of health problems at all, and have really had health decline in so many areas of my life. Unfortunately, it was not as easy as just giving up mammalian meat, as Tina and Jennifer mentioned. I continued to have reactions past that. So eventually I learned all about all the mammal that's in so much of the food that we eat that we don't realize we're eating. I spent days in the grocery store crying, Googling all the different ingredients of the foods that I love, only to find out, okay, well, maybe it was that. Well, and so I would cut that out, but then still have reactions. Well, maybe it's this. Cut that out and still having reactions. So eventually I gave up dairy and just continued to cut and cut and cut as I learned more and more of the different things in our lives that have mammal in them. I was also very lucky that I developed airborne reactions. That seems to be more rare with alpha-gal, but basically I cannot be in the room with meat, pork, or beef cooking, or my airway starts closing up on me. So that obviously that significantly limits so much of what I do. That limits eating at my mom's house if they're cooking pork. That means I can't go out to eat anymore. Just many parts of my life that have changed. Even today, I texted Jennifer and I said, I hope I'm going to make it. I went to the grocery store. I shop in this grocery store every week. I never have a reaction, but I usually go in the mornings. I went in the afternoon today. I have no idea what they were cooking in the deli, but whatever it was enough to cause a reaction. And not bad enough that I had anaphylaxis or anything, but just enough to make me feel bad, which just seems to be the story of my life, that you think you're feeling better, you have a couple of good days, and then you walk into the school and they're having barbecue pork for lunch that day, and so you start over again. So that's been a real challenge for me. I also developed a lot of secondary illnesses. I developed really severe acid reflux. I developed some issues with my mast cells. And so I've continued over time, over the last few years, just having to do a lot of research and a lot of learning. And so it really infiltrates every bit of my life. I think the most difficult part is how it's affected my family. My poor mother, she's a Southern cook, and she wants me to come over for Sunday dinner. But when I go through the list of things that I can't eat anymore, her poor eyes glaze over, and she does her best to accommodate, but it's really hard on her. I have children and a husband. They can't eat the foods that they love in our house anymore. We can't go to dinner anymore together. My kids have been with me when I've had really severe reactions, and so it scares them, and so they worry that every time something's going on, is my mom going to be okay? And I'm sure people with food allergies have had to do the same thing, where you look at your 10-year-old and you say, if I need this EpiPen, this is the way that I need you to use it. But for them, that's really terrifying. And it just affects traveling. My husband and I just went to the mountains recently. I had to think through everything that we were going to do. On the drive there, where are we stopping? What food do I need to have in the car? When we get there, how are we going to eat? What grocery store can I shop at? Will they have the food there that I can eat? What can I cook on while I'm there? So many things that it can become quite overwhelming. But I'm really thankful that I am in a Facebook support group with a lot of the women who are speaking here today. That's probably been the most life-changing help for me. I have a wonderful allergist, but the research is kind of lagging. They're still trying to figure out the beginning part of alpha-gal, and in the meantime, we're all living with it. So having that anecdotal help has been really great. So that's kind of it, but it's not a death sentence. I know we make it sound so terrible. It is really challenging, but if you can find a group of people, if you can find the information, the support, and we can learn from each other, then it makes it bearable, and it makes you be able to get through that day and figure it out. So good luck.
Thank you so much. What a vivid picture you painted for us.
So it's interesting as you listen to some of the stories, hearing people their first exposure and finding out is through anaphylaxis or these random reactions. And in fact, there's actually a study in Sweden that states that 50% of the patients were self-diagnosed, and as Jamie pointed out, it can go years. Like myself, it was back in the 90s that I was bitten by what I called a sick tick, the tick with the white spot. I'd never seen a tick like that, and had random hives, and it progressed. And so it took about 15 years before I connected the dots, and thanks to the support group, figured that out. So here's just another example. If we have Renee on the line still, I'd like to introduce Renee Morecombe from across the globe in in South Africa. And Renee, she's self-diagnosed as well. And not only that, but she was the first person in her country diagnosed with alpha-gal. And it was because of the support groups online that have been set up that helped her find the information she needed. So I'll let Renee share her story now. We have Renee on?
Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hi. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to share my story with the world. I live in Pietermaritzburg, South Africa, and together with my husband and 3 children, we run an orphanage called Tambi House, caring for orphaned and abandoned babies. My alpha-gal journey has brought a mix of emotions, both positive and negative. It has been a long, scary journey, and yet in some ways my journey has brought with it many blessings and friendships all over the world. On the 17th of January 2016, I had my first reaction, severe anaphylaxis. Like many at the time, my first reaction, I did not know about alpha-gal. In 8 months, I had 6 severe anaphylactic reactions. I was hospitalized and tested for everything but alpha-gal. I began to live in fear. I didn't even want to eat. I eventually Googled the late anaphylaxis and discovered alpha-gal and later tested positive. I found an alpha-gal Facebook support group and was welcomed in and guided by its members. I have since opened a local support group in South Africa called alpha-gal SA. Had been answers, I thought I would feel empowered, except this was not the case. I felt alone. There were no other doctors in my country that could accurately guide me on this path, as they don't know about alpha-gal in South Africa. This is due to a lack of exposure of alpha-gal, and this is an issue faced worldwide. I felt I needed to consult with a doctor who knew what alpha-gal was, so I decided to go to America and see Dr. Scott Commons. This was not as simple as just jumping on an aeroplane. I do not earn a paycheck, and I rely on donations to run the orphanage. I opened a crowdfunding page and had to raise money. Within a few weeks, friends, family, and people I've never met donated to make my cause possible. In April 2017, having never been on an aeroplane in my life, I took nothing more but a small backpack, a few dollars in my pocket, and a backpack through America. I was kindly hosted by the new friends I made on Facebook. I was able to consult with Dr. Commons. He was able to answer my many questions and guided me how to live with alpha-gal. I am forever grateful to him and the positive impact he had on my health. Since my diagnosis, my daughter, son, and husband developed alpha-gal. The reality is you only learn you have alpha-gal once you have your first reaction, and you just hope it's not a bad one. This has created a lot of fear in my life for the children at my home that haven't got it yet. We try hard to keep our home alpha-gal safe for all our children. However, this isn't possible because we live off donations. I'm concerned about how alpha-gal will impact the people in my country. Our doctors and nurses are yet to learn about alpha-gal. I was self-diagnosed through internet research. However, 2 million households in South Africa do not have access to electricity, and 46% of people do not have access to internet. We also have 11 official languages in South Africa. How will many people find the knowledge and support they need? South Africa has a free national health service, and as many as 82% of South Africans use this health service. There are currently no provisions for labeling the ingredients of medication, as it's bought in bulk and then put into small plastic bags. Labeling is a worldwide issue for alpha-gal. Furthermore, South Africa has the highest HIV epidemic in the world. Research will need to be done to determine if ARVs contain traces of mammal byproducts. Some of the children I care for in my orphanage are on ARVs. If they get alpha-gal, would they have to choose between life-saving ARVs or deadly anaphylaxis? 55% of South Africans live on less than $1 to $2 a day and cannot afford the cost of EpiPens and testing. My family doesn't have an EpiPen, and we use an ampoule of adrenaline and a needle. The current system, there's no place to get tested in the government facility, and we pay out of pocket. I live near my local hospital, but not many in South Africa do. More are at risk of alpha-gal are those that live in rural areas and are far from hospital. Alpha-gal is a medical emergency. According to our local government ambulance service, the average response time is 108 minutes to rural areas. However, I did a public poll, and the response came back that it takes between 2 and 8 hours for an ambulance to arrive at a medical emergency. South Africa has made some positive leaps forward. In June 2017, a small team of doctors did a study in rural Eastern Cape and discovered 84 patients that tested positive for alpha-gal. An additional 24 patients tested positive through private labs throughout our country. That totals us to 108 patients with alpha-gal, and I believe there are more. They just remain undiagnosed. I am thankful to the international alpha-gal community, the doctors, researchers, and patients and advocates. It is because of your voice I was diagnosed. I ask you, be louder, be stronger, because your voice needs to be heard around the world now more than ever. Thank you for this opportunity.
Well done, Renee. Well done. Thank you very much for sharing that story. Every time I get choked up listening to her. She raises, quite the valid point here that, we have a big challenge ahead of us. We're a small group, but we're mighty. We reached South Africa. So thank you, Renee, for all that you do for us and for your countrymen over there. So now I would like to introduce Dr. Cheryl Van Noonen, who is the original founder of alpha-gal. She first described the association between the tick bites and subsequent development of mammalian meat anaphylaxis, and first described ticks as an insect causing anaphylaxis. And with that, I would like to introduce the founder of alpha-gal, Dr. Van Noonen from Australia.
I saw my first patient with mammalian meat allergy after tick bite in 1987. And one person who's had that allergy for over 45 years now that I've met, a colleague. You have two problems with ticks, and the other problem that we have is tick anaphylaxis, which we seem to suffer from in this country much more than around the rest of the world. Tick anaphylaxis was described first in Australia as well, and we seem to have an inordinate number of our people with tick anaphylaxis. That probably relates to the type of tick that we have here. We have 70 species in Australia, and around 16 of those will infest humans. 95% of the bites are from the one species, which is the Australian paralysis tick, Ixodes holocyclus. We'll move on to the next slide. This is the business end of the Ixodes holocyclus, the hypostome or the feeding tube, and that's protected from the two palps. The two palps basically steady the tick in inserting her hypostome, and then she is, if we could have the next slide, planning to make a blood lake, and the way she feeds. So the Greek term telmophagy means blood lake feeder, and she communicates with a dermal capillary plexus, in other words, very tiny blood vessels in our skin. And she forms a chamber And when that chamber is disturbed, then our people can have tick anaphylaxis. When the chamber has been used to make her 2,500 to 3,000 babies, she will then depart, pop a little bit of sunscreen on them, wish them well, and leave them in some leaf litter. Now, this tick takes a little from the blood, squirts a little into the area, but when it's disturbed, we think it squirts a lot, and that's created most of the difficulty. Our tick has a particularly long hypostome. It's around the world. So when we look at where our tick lives all down the eastern seaboard of Australia on that next slide. So the distribution map shows that around 50% of our population is at risk of a tick bite. Technically, for example, I live in a tick endemic area. I spend most of my time seeing people with tick-related allergies. I haven't yet had a tick bite. I'm pleased to say. My daughter has, however, and for some time she was intolerant to milk after that, and this involved her trekking through a bushland to get to her netball course, which is a very popular sport for girls over here. So even when you don't actually have exposure, your recreation or your work can take you into these areas, as you know. Our tick, as with most ticks around the world, it loves autumn to make her larvae. She's done her eggs in summer and left them. And then in winter we have the nymphs. And the nymphs, people can have nymph bites by themselves, only ever have a nymph bite. And they can contract mammalian meat allergy after tick bite. Adult form of the tick is the only form of the tick which will provoke an anaphylaxis. So while I've seen 1,200 people with mammalian meat allergy after tick bite, I've seen only 209 with tick anaphylaxis. That said, there's a very high rate of fatality with tick anaphylaxis when you consider the smaller number of people. Now, if we go on to the next slide, we too think that 2003, the numbers of cases of people with mammalian meat allergy after tick bite in Australia really increased markedly. And when we look at that, it involved the fact that we had feral foxes that had been baited in our national parks. And so small animals, the small native mammals, came back to us. And one of those native mammals is the bandicoot, which is the little furry creature just next to the tick in the top left lane of that slide. So tick-induced allergies are what happens when an accomplished parasite, the tick, takes a cute furry mammal like the bandicoot, or a not so cute furry animal like the rat, Rattus rattus, and then lodges in a human skin. And that skin is a very rich immunological milieu, as Tina would tell us as well. And it converts that rich immunological milieu to rendering that person pro-allergy. And this is a rodent model that is in existence with a different tick, not the Australian tick, but multiple tick bites can actually promote a Th2 predominance in a rodent, and therefore very likely does in a human. Is the only allergen in the world where we know why you became allergic to your allergen. In other words, the tick has altered the system. It also is allergy in a kit in that it injects the allergen, and that bypasses the usual immune tolerance mechanisms in the mouth. So if we go to that next slide, that actually shows that and results in a switch from your body producing IgE, which is protective against infection, to producing the allergy antibody, and that leads to the cross-reactive allergic reaction to the meat allergens, or the development of specific IgE directed against the tick salivary protein, of which there are 5 candidates for the causation of tick anaphylaxis. if we go to the next slide, then here we see 4 major groups of allergic reactions to ticks. One's the large local reaction, where people have a 5 by 5 centimetre woody reddened area, which takes about 7 to 10 days to disappear. And then we have the mammalian meat-induced anaphylaxis associated with prior tick bites. We like to call it mammalian meat allergy because we feel that that keeps our people safer. Because the primary message to get across is that it's all mammals. In fact, we've had a small boy who was diagnosed at the emergency department of one of the regional hospitals, but his mother was told to avoid red meat, and so she fed him pork. And this is something that you and Tina and everybody who takes care of people or has this problem quickly find out that this is all to do with mammals. So we have to warn our travellers about not eating guinea pigs in South America and all of the things that we do on a daily basis. The other problem that we have is tick-induced anaphylaxis, and then we have an inordinate number of people who have underlying systemic mastocytosis when they've had anaphylaxis to both ticks and mammalian meat allergy often. Now, in 2018, we're continuing to see an increase in the numbers of individuals with mammalian meat allergy after tick bite worldwide. Tick bites have been confirmed around the world as the mechanism. These statements are no longer controversial. Initially, when it was described, I think my colleagues really thought I slipped my trolley wheels. But they've become quite used to this now, and the reason we presented the work in 2007 was to notify my colleagues across Australia of this problem. Because patients were having great difficulty getting a diagnosis. The implications have been increasingly recognised, and they've been described by Tina, Jennifer and Renee as well this morning, and the difficulties with it, and the fact that, for example, if I get an inquiry about a vaccination, this can take 7 hours of looking at it, 4 emails and 3 telephone calls was the last one, and that was about a vaccine. So some of them are easier to deal with. For example, the Japanese encephalitis vaccine is luckily made in the kidney epithelial cells of the African green monkey, which fortunately is an old world monkey, and therefore it doesn't contain alpha-gal, and therefore this has been safe for our people. So it's even brand by brand, as has been pointed out as well, that it's absolutely that people have to examine everything. This makes it for a great burden of disease, a very great burden of disease. This has been so eloquently described by you all today. Region is reducing the numbers because we have had so many active awareness initiatives. So, for example, we go to gatherings like council fairs where there might be 30,000 people come through in a day, and we'll teach 170 families that day how to deal with tick bites, how to prevent them, how to manage them when they occur. This would be a 5-hour exercise, and so we take our materials and we go and teach them to the nth degree, and hopefully they'll teach the rest of their families, and this will ultimately get across, we think. Tick anaphylaxis, I've mentioned the high fatality rate, so we go on to the next slide. One of the problems with tick anaphylaxis is that if it's 209 people in Australia and 6 people around the rest of the world, no manufacturer would be interested in developing an immunotherapy for this. It's just commercially not viable. Luckily, tick anaphylaxis is a lot easier to deal with because it's all about not disturbing the tick and the other methods that I'll show you that we're trying to popularise. So 2007, we have this reported on one continent with 1 tick. We've just, one of our other articles is in press at the moment, which we've described a second species of tick on the other side of the country as causing mammalian meat allergy. And then in 2018, it's been reported now on all continents where individuals are bitten by ticks, and in 17 countries. And Tina might be able to add a few others. I mean, certainly anecdotally, it's more than 17 countries, because I have emails from Costa Rica and Brazil and all sorts of places that I'm even on a list of countries where it's been confirmed as being a problem. So if we go to the next, current prevalence rates, this is extremely prevalent here in the region that I live in, and the highest in the world. And it's a more common reason in my region for an adult carrying an EpiPen than peanut allergy, which, as you know, is the commonest food allergy requiring an EpiPen around the world. So it's something that, because of that, then our people are getting a lot more support, and with education of our primary care physicians and such, we seem to be able to be making a dent in it. One of the problems with it, as you know, is that when you look at the fact, if we look at the next slide, that it is in these many countries, what it means is the people from those countries, so all of our Australians, must thought that if they travel in these areas, then they stand the possibility of sensitisation. So I have a couple of patients who come back from Denmark and places, and the US and places where this condition exists, who contracted it overseas. But all of our people in Australia need to know, if you go to these places, you don't get bitten by a tick anywhere in the world, because, as we know, that tick bite will recharge your allergy, which will worsen it. And if you don't get another tick bite, we see quite a reduction here in the alpha-gal specific IgE, and the specific IgE for beef, lamb, and pork. So tick species, it doesn't seem to be limited to one species. As you can see from the next slide, there have been quite a number of species suspected or proven as being involved in the generation of mammalian meat allergy after tick bite. We've done a lot of work with this next slide, just showing you that we've got an education program for our general practitioners who are our primary care physicians, and we teach them what the pitfalls are. And the pitfalls, as you know, are lack of awareness in the doctor or the patient of the existence of the condition. And we try and teach them the axiom that where certain tick species are endemic and humans are bitten, the mammalian meat allergy will occur. We also have to try and teach them that interpreting the presence of alpha-gal specific IgE in the absence of a supportive clinical history doesn't indicate that the person's necessarily allergic to mammalian meat, but there are some riders when we educate them about that, because of the effect of amplifying factors, and the fact that this condition is very, very sensitive to amplifying factors or cofactors, as they're used in the literature, of particularly exercise and alcohol. Various mantra that we've had to develop as well, because not all mammalian meat will necessarily be equivalent from the point of view of how much alpha-gal it contains and how much it might be able to release. We'll know, and as all of the speakers will know because they've experienced the results of it. So we developed a mantra like offal is awful, because when you have the offal, it's enriched for the alpha-gal allergen, as you know, and so have to be particularly careful. One of the problems with barbecues, of course, which are very popular here, and I'm sure they're very popular where you live as well, in good weather, that the sausage can have a natural encasing on it, even if it's a chicken sausage, and this contributes to the 30% around the world value for people who have symptoms after they inhale the allergen. is seen to be quite an odd thing, but it really shouldn't be seen to be odd because, after all, we know what's for dinner when we arrive at the front door. If somebody else has cooked it, because we've smelled it, which means we've inhaled it, and that means we've swallowed 90% of what we've inhaled. So it shouldn't be a surprise to medical people that people could have symptoms from walking past a barbecue. One of the patients actually had to sell her business because she lived next door to the local scout hall, and they would regularly have barbecues, and she closed her antique shop and moved elsewhere. So all of the impact of this is quite considerable, as you know. So the concept that we're trying to teach the general practitioners when they're diagnosing people is that mammalian meat allergy after tick bite is an any time, but not an every time reaction. And that we teach our patients that if you want to know how severe a reaction you can have, then you run to the restaurant, you stuff yourself with the allergen, you put chili all over it or some other herbal spice, take a glass of wine with it, have non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug the day before, be slightly unwell, slow cook your meat or reheat your meat, which brings out more of the alpha-gal. If you're female, be premenstrual and stand back and you'll see whether or not you react to it. So we have to be cruel in that statement to point out that all of these factors can make a difference to that individual person when they are exposed to the allergen as to whether or not they have a reaction or not. So I think that the crucial role of cofactors is something that's very well appreciated in the European literature, as Tina will know. We also have to teach them that not everybody will react all the time, so some of our people will be able to have some of the allergen without getting deprived because they're not particularly sensitive to cofactors and their sensitization levels are becoming less. So many of our people can have a small piece of bacon, a small piece of lamb. Lamb's not big in America, I know, as a food, but lamb usually contains less alpha-gal. So you get a guide from this when we do the test, because the alpha-gal it's done on offal, it's done on thyroglobulin from an animal, virtually an offal specific IgE test, and then the beef, the lamb and the pork will be a different amount usually. So if we go to the next slide, then I'll just tell you about something that you don't really see much in the United States that I'm aware of, and that's tick anaphylaxis. So between spring of 2011, which for us is September 2011, until yesterday, I have seen 209 individuals with tick anaphylaxis, and in a similar time, I've seen very few individuals with wasp or European wasp or bee venom allergy. So in our country, there have been 4 fatalities, and when you consider that we're talking about probably a couple of thousand people, that's quite a high fatality rate. And it's certainly more common to have a life-threatening reaction to a tick in Australia than it is to be struck by lightning or be attacked by a shark. As you know, the problems that you live with on a daily basis, if you have mammalian meat allergy, dietary gelatin, milk products in wines and things that are quite subtle until you've learned about it, the parenteral gelatin, the vaccinations, the cetuximab. We have, unfortunately, one fatality here with cetuximab as well. The heart valve prostheses that are porcine, even though they're treated. And, of course, anti-venoms are a potential problem, collagen implants, the exotic meats when travelling, and really another risk that the other problem is really a future tick bite because of the recharging effect. The tick anaphylaxis cases that we've seen are also increasing markedly, and this probably relates back to the fox baiting, the generation of a larger number of small mammals which wander into our backyards, more people living in these areas, more people liking an open backyard. So in Australia, a 1950s and 1960s backyard would have been wooden paling fence, short grass that Dad would mow once a week, left it with maybe a lemon tree and a hibiscus or an oleander or another sort of fruit tree in the backyard, and that was it. But now people like their bush, they like their leaf litter, they like their compost, and these are all areas where the tick can really make a wonderful home and survive. We've probably some microclimate change as well, and certain climate change, when you look at the Canadian information, shows that the ticks are on the march with minor climate change. So we anticipate, as I'm sure everybody around the world does, that this can be an increasing problem. But we've seen an exponential rise, as you can see from this current slide, from 1940, when the first case was described in Australia. And then we had one case in California, one case in France reported, and that will mean there are more cases, we know, and then around 4 cases reported, 6 cases in Spain. So 209 versus 6 to 8 cases in the rest of the world means there's something very special about our tick, as we appreciate. This creates an enormous burden. If you can go to the next slide. Moffatt Vale is a hospital on a peninsula just to the north of where I'm speaking, and it is tick central for our area. They've had 566 people present with tick bites from a population of around 200,000 over 3 years. 34 of these individuals have had anaphylaxis to the tick, 26 of them needed adrenaline. So great burden on our emergency surfaces. With the next slide, there was a chap called Bernie Stone, who was a scientist. He worked for the CSIRO. The CSIRO here would be the equivalent of your CDC, but scientific organisation. And he studied ticks all his professional life, and he happened to become allergic to the tick. And he looked at this very carefully and formed the opinion that the tick should be killed in situ, where it is. And that's been recommended since 2003 in our region, with absolute alcohol initially, followed by Aerostat, and now we have ether freezing sprays. And so tick-off is a recent introduction, which is specifically for ticks. And we ask people to get a centimetre above the tick and kill the tick by administering 5 sprays of ether, and then examine it under the microscope to see if the legs have stopped moving, wait for it to drop off, or remove it with very fine tip forceps, as in jeweler's forceps, preferably in the hands of an expert. So we reviewed 78 tick anaphylaxis sufferers and showed that none of them had actually removed the tick after killing it in situ. But then 8 of them have a recurrent tick bite, and they did it as we suggested. None of them had a recurrence. They're small numbers, but they're suggestive. And then in 2017, there's an in-press article now where my colleagues at Moffatt Vale have done a study that we designed showing 100% lack of allergic reactions to the tick after careful removal with fine tip forceps. That's providing the tick was not located near eyes or genitals where you can't really use the freezing agent, or indeed possibly the permethrin cream. So in Australia, the occurrence of tick anaphylaxis in our people really means that it's taught us what to do about tick bites in our population in general, which might actually reduce the risk of them developing mammalian meat allergy, certainly abolish the risk of them having a reaction to the tick salivary proteins, so a tick allergy itself. If we go to the next slide, it just goes through that particular study where we had 78 tick anaphylaxis sufferers in between 2011 and 2014, 65. We had the details regarding their tick removal, and not one of them, as I said, had produced managed to kill the tick in situ. So it means that we think that around 98.5, 100% of people, providing it's not in a difficult area, can be protected. But we've spent a lot of time with working with the community and with media, with really well-respected media in all forms, trying to get across the idea of if you live, work, volunteer or play where ticks live, then you don't scratch anything you can't see, because it could be a tick, and when you disturb a tick, the tick will squirt allergen into you, so do not disturb a tick and kill the tick where it is so she can't squirt allergen into you. For the prevention of tick bites, we're very fond of dress for the occasion and treat your backyard as our mantra. And dress for the occasion, if we move on to the next slide, we like a long sleeve shirt, which is fitted at the wrists, long t-shirt, which can tuck into long pants with a good tail on it so that the back of this t-shirt can't come out and people are working. And then tuck the pants legs into long socks. And ideally, all of that would be permethrin bonded in the fabric with this being done in a factory. There's been good evidence that this will be helpful. Wear the colour that's light in colour, so it makes it easier to see the ticks. Brush the clothes when you come in. Check a few ticks daily. Use the heat in any preparation you like, following the manufacturer's instructions for the areas you can't cover. And as I said, develop these mantra on the next slide, which is the ticks you can hardly see, i.e. the larval and the nymph stage ticks. We tell them, dab it, don't grab it, which is apply the tickercide permethrin. So you squeeze up a little bit of the permethrin as a blob and then just touch that blob to the tick without disturbing the tick. Leave that there until the tick's dead in about an hour and a half, and scrape it out using a straight-edged, reasonably sharp instrument. And the ticks you can see, the mantra freeze it, don't squeeze it, which is used in ether-containing spray, preferably tick off, because the other things, the skin tags and warts, usually have applicators in them, which people will apply to the tick directly and disturb the tick, or elastoplast cold spray. And then we ask them to remember that household tweezers are tick squeezers, because so many of our people have had tick anaphylaxis when they've used household tweezers. So these are gradually becoming a mantra, and we're trying to get the message out there that mammalian meat allergy after tick bite and tick anaphylaxis are the allergies you don't have to have. Now, it might be a little bit different in the United States. The ticks are different. Our tick does not have cement, for example. And so it would be very important to look at what for example, the Powassan virus, which is a problem in your area. Not that I think where you are, Tina, but you can correct me on that assumption if it's incorrect. But if the Powassan virus was in your ticks, then you really need to get the tick out within 15 minutes. So you don't have the luxury of letting the thing die, dehydrate and drop off. And so it may be that that's different, but there does need to be some work, and indeed there is some work being done on looking at the effectiveness of killing the tick in situ upon any development of an infectious disease, because that's particularly a problem in countries other than Australia. We have rickettsiosis, and we have people who develop a disease which has similar features to Lyme disease, but we don't actually have Lyme disease here in this country, so we do have some luxury in that regard. So all of it, in 2013, we convened the Tick-Induced Allergies Research and Awareness, and this has been a really fantastic community initiative. So a number of very eminent Australians across a range of disciplines have been kind enough to join the committee, because our people are having a little bit of trouble, as you've all had trouble in being recognised. And so that meant some weight to their daily lives in being understood with the mammalian meat allergy after tick bite, which was very important. We've done a lot of work with general practitioners and emergency physicians, and we've also done a lot of work, as I said, with the media, but Janelle's also done a lot of work with her Facebook group, as you know. Nothing happens by yourself, and so the next slide is a notice of acknowledgements of the people who've been helped. We've had a lot of help from our local councils. We've developed a industrial, where people who work for the councils, one of our councils has a 100% tick exposure rate, because if you walk to get your lunch, even though you're working as a clerk in the council building, you're still exposed to ticks on your way to pick up a nice lunch outside. So the councils have been particularly good with this, organising a program to protect their workers. We've done a lot of education there, and they also fund the evenings where we educate the community. So it really has been a very humbling experience for me as to what, in particular, the Williams family have done with the website, and what people will do, despite the fact that they've developed these illnesses, to help others not develop them and to deal with them. So I think I'd like to congratulate you all on the work that you're doing as well. Thank you very much.
Dr. Van Noonen, I have to say that many of the things that you've shared with us tonight have been incredibly fascinating, and Beth and I are learning right along with everybody else. And I especially appreciate your insights about the prevention, and the freeze, don't squeeze tagline and approach hasn't quite made it here to the U.S. And I've been really interested in the research that you've shared on that, and we're going to...
We actually have a couple questions for her.
Yeah, great. So yeah, we are going to have time for a couple questions, and then we'll wrap up.
The question is, have you ever tested for alpha-gal in the saliva glands, in people's mouths? I guess a swab in people's mouths?
No, I haven't done that. No.
Our next question is from Nancy Jo Smith. How long does it take to get a diagnosis from a blood test?
We have particularly the alpha-gal specific IgE test, the ImmunoCAP, was introduced here quite a few years ago now, and we've been using the blood testing exclusively. What I used to do to test people would be to get raw organic meat from Sam the Organic Butcher a few kilometres from where I'm sitting and take this in to test people. Because a lot of people would initially say, oh, it must be the chemicals in the meat, doctor. But now we have the ability to test this anywhere people can have blood taken, because our pathology is, we have very big companies, and so you could have this test done in the most remote community. Your blood would be taken to major centres, and this can be tested quite easily. If I see somebody here, they can have the blood taken that day, the test will be done the next day, and they'll have their answer the day after that.
Next question. Are you aware that they have begun to add alpha-galactose to chicken feed in various parts of commercial chicken production?
Well, I think that what they probably are adding is alpha-galactosidase. So there's an enzyme which breaks down simple carbohydrates called alpha-galactosidase, which you can buy in 500 kilogram lots from China. And they add that to chicken feed because it breaks down the complex carbohydrate to simple carbohydrates. So the result is you get a fatter chicken faster.
I have a question for Tina, for Dr. Merritt. So there seems to be different camps among allergists about what they tell people once they're diagnosed. Some doctors say just avoid mammalian meat, but continue on with dairy and mammalian byproducts unless an issue arises. But it sounds like maybe you give information to go ahead and start looking into shampoos, into your medicines. So I'm just wondering, when someone's diagnosed, what is that initial information that you're giving them?
I usually give my patients 3 different handouts. One of them is from my local support group, Jennifer Burton here. She did a lovely little glossy brochure that gives some of the basic information about what to avoid and how to get to her support group. I also give a handout that's actually from my local VA hospital, where one of the dietitians put together a list of medicines and foods that you wouldn't think of, that like Pop-Tarts contain gelatin, so things like that. I also have a blog, Tina Hatley Alpha Gal, that I started in 2010 that listed some of the basic information about it. And I have a little summary of the story behind Alpha Gal that I give with the summary that's in that blog of what to avoid.
I have had to stop my statin drugs because I have not been able to find any that don't have lactose, because I'm very sensitive to little bits of this stuff. Have any of your patients, do you know, have found a source of a statin or a cholesterol-lowering drug that is safe for us?
Not that I'm aware of. Recently about cholesterol being related to alpha-gal allergy possibly, and I don't know yet what that's going to mean as far as reducing your risk of having cholesterol issues. If you can cut out beef and pork and mammalian meat, could that possibly affect your cholesterol levels? We don't really know, because we just saw that association recently. Some patients have to have their medicines compounded, and that's when you really need to find a good mom and pop pharmacy that will actually look into the ingredients of your medicines and then possibly compound them. The problem with that is the insurance companies aren't covering compounded medicines for the most part. I do have a patient that has to have her antidepressant and her Benadryl compounded, and luckily those aren't too terribly expensive. I personally have a blood pressure medicine that I had to do some research and find the one I could have. And one of my other medicines had pre-gelatinized starch. It took me 6 months to figure out that tablet was making me have reactions due to the pre-gelatinized starch. So I think it's very important to find a pharmacy that will look into the inactive ingredients, because a lot of times there are mammal products.
Unfortunately, I checked on the compounding, and they said they couldn't compound what I needed. And so I'm still looking for a substitute, and unfortunately, even doing without the meat, my cholesterol is still high. I guess I have just those genes that do that to me.
Well, I can, if you want to email me, I can look into it and see if there is something listed. I did have a local pharmacist at Walmart recently tell me about an app where you can look at inactive ingredients of the various, even like generic medications, so that you can see if those particular brands have the mammal products. If you want to email me at tinahatley@yahoo.com.
All right, I guess my first question is actually about the health departments. I have, my name's Elizabeth, and I started the Alpha Gal Virginia group, and one of my big things that I'm looking to do is contact the local, every county health department, and I'm just looking for some advice on how to approach that in an effective manner. If anyone knows that answer, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. Thanks, Elizabeth. That's something that all of us need to do, I think, within the Alpha Gal community, is to get actively involved like you have been. Elizabeth's been doing great videos, as you saw in the loop at the beginning of the event. But you can look to the Facebook pages for different, like Tina was mentioning, the Facebook pages have a lot of great files. At our website, tvcu.com, you'll be able to download lots of different files that you can bring to your physicians, your health departments. You can bring it to the scouts and outdoor groups and things like that to raise awareness and just get involved with that. But we'll have links to credible resources like this presentation and many of the other resources. But right now, you can go right out to, there's over 30 different alpha-gal groups under different names. You can Google, just start with alpha, mammalian meat allergy, red meat allergy, and you'll find all the different groups. So definitely, it's important that the entire alpha-gal community continue to work together in information and file share like that. So that's something that we're trying to help as well with. So yeah, that's a great question. Excellent question. Thank you.
So about killing the tick before you get it off, take it off. I'm a farmer and I now have alpha-gal, but I used to get a lot of ticks. And I used to rub Dawn detergent on the tick until it let go. You just gently rub it. Now, is that mashing it, or do yeah, it might be washing it. I mean, I didn't push hard on it to try to kill it. My theory was I was going to suffocate it, and it usually let go after a minute or so.
I can take that question real quickly, and if anybody else wants to chime in, but what the research has shown is that you should not do anything like that that would agitate the tick. Put essential oils on it or soap, the Dawn soap, because what they've figured out is that it makes the tick more likely to regurgitate and or defecate materials as it's coming out. And then if you're handling it with your bare hands especially, then you might have microabrasions in your skin, and that causes issues, risks of you getting whatever's going on with that particular tick, and which makes Cheryl's information especially, I think, interesting about the freeze, don't squeeze approach.
I have another question from online.
Mm-hmm.
Carla Shackelford is asking the doctor, have you any information on the potential to contract alpha-gal allergy from blood transfusions? Anyone? It's for the doctor, but if anyone can answer, if you have any information on the potential of contracting alpha-gal allergy from blood transfusions. Anyone?
If you had a very high level of alpha-gal in your blood, alpha-gal specific Ig in your blood, technically you could transfer that, but in actual fact the half-life of that would be quite low. So having long-lasting allergy from from any blood transfusion hasn't been seen. It's only been seen with a liver transplant and peanut allergy being transferred by that. And I think that would be a low risk because firstly, you're only receiving sort of 250, 300, maybe 500 mils. And it needs to be a very high level of that. You'd need to have the meat delivered to you very quickly after the transfusion as well, in my view. Regarded as an unlikelihood that you'd be clinically allergic to it under those circumstances.
Hey, I have a question about Xolair. It's a monoclonal antibody that Dr. Commons has put me on to treat the idiopathic urticaria, however you pronounce it. I don't quite understand how the Xolair works, and is that something that's common to treat IgE allergies? I need a better explanation than what I've gotten so far about the Xolair and how that works.
The question about the Xolair binds up IgE receptors. So regardless of what's triggering mast cells, it's blocking the IgE receptor. So some people do well on Xolair. I do have a couple of patients that have had allergic reactions to Xolair. It's a different carbohydrate. It's not alpha-gal, but there is that risk of having a reaction to the carbohydrate on the Xolair. but it's supposed to bind up IgE receptors regardless of what's triggering them.
What happens to the IgE receptors once they're back?
What happens to the IgE receptors once they're back?
Bound.
Once they're bound, I'm sorry. What happens to them once they're bound?
Well, the thought is once they're bound that you won't have IgE mediated reactions, but the Xolair is an IgG based medication, so it can only last for 21 to 28 days in your system. So usually people get injections from every 2 weeks to every 4 weeks, depending on their symptoms. If it's for urticaria, the U.S. only has FDA approval for every 4 weeks, but I've usually gotten it approved more frequently if people are having breakthrough urticaria. It's not really indicated for alcohol.
We have another question also from online, and that question is from Alice Wiggins, asking, can we get access to all 3 different brochures? I guess were some brochures, Jennifer and Beth?
Yeah, so there's different brochures on some of the different websites and different files on all the different websites. So if you go into the Facebook groups, and then, there'll be the about and there'll be photos, the links. Look for the files link. And when you access that, you'll be able to look at all the different files that are saved on the various Facebook groups.
And on the TBC United website, we can point you to where to go find those files so we can cross-reference them.
So the subsequent question is, are they able to print them? Ashley Bauer, where can we get one of these brochures, and are they able to print those off? They able to print the brochures, yes? Yep,
they would be able to go right onto the Facebook page and click the files section and then just save it or print it. And then same thing with the tbcunited.com website. You'll be able to access lots of different files and things like that you'll be able to bring around to your community.
Yeah, pretty soon we'll have a general alpha-gal brochure that's available for anybody to use as an initial resource on our website.
Doug Dodson asked, avoidance of triggers can help reduce reactions, but how can avoidance lead to overcoming the allergy completely?
I guess that would be a question for any of the doctors, Dr. Merritt or Dr. Van Noonen. Is it possible to overcome alpha-gal by removing the exposure?
There are a couple of points to make. Firstly, having your allergen doesn't make your allergy worse. I think that's a truism which has been established in many allergies. What made you allergic to it is the scenario to avoid to improve your allergy. It's my view that all allergies will, over some time, many years, if there's a year, 10, 20 years, will ultimately lessen, because the immune system will continue to try and fix the situation. So having your allergen doesn't give you any problem. Avoiding what made you allergic that need to be done. And that's really the lesson, as I've mentioned, from the tick anaphylaxis, in that if it's avoided, then we see a reduction in the amount of specific IgE directed against the alpha-gal progressively. This is very helpful for our patients to keep them doing what they need to do to avoid ticks, to have their backyards treated and make sure their clothing's appropriate, particularly with the nymph ticks, because the nymph ticks are an issue. The adult ticks are much easier to avoid, but the nymph ticks are very tiny. And it's a lot harder. I think you might call them chiggers where you are, but it really needs the effort of doing that. So the only way you can affect allergy is to avoid the circumstances which made it in the first place. And that's where mammalian beef allergy after tick bite is quite as well around the world, because the fact that we know that the tick did this to you means unparalleled opportunities worldwide for primary, in other words, people not getting it in the first place, and secondary, in other words, people losing it by avoiding tick bites in the future.
We have another question. We have a few more. Amy Bloomfeld asks, she says she thought that pre-gelatinized starch was vegan and has nothing to do with animal gelatin. Can someone explain? Go ahead.
You know, if I can make a suggestion that we'll collect some of these questions and we'll do our best to get the answers from maybe, you know, Dr. Van Noonen and Dr. Tina Merritt, if you would indulge us in some email conversation and answering a couple of the last questions, because we are running over on time. And then we'll go ahead and post that on the website as a follow-up to this event tonight. Because, you know, for some of the people, Renee, it's the middle of the night in Australia. So,
well, we've been thrilled at the response. We have at probably about 40 or 50 people here in the room, and we had almost 200 registrations. So we know we've had an incredible appetite for this information, and hopefully everybody here has learned something tonight. And especially understanding that no one experiences this allergy the same, and even within individuals, it can be different anytime. So with that, I think.
So with that, we want to close and say a special thank you to all of our sponsors, Amarillo Hill Farms, the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, Tick Warriors, Dr. Tina Merritt's Allergy Clinic, Tickies with Dan the Tick Man, or Tick Man Dan, and just
that Health Center out of Siler City,
Chatham County Marketplace. I mean, we've had an outpouring of support. So thank you to everybody for supporting online, in person, supporting it financially to help present this information, and especially to TaJ Talk for giving us this platform. And so what we would like to close and say is something that we often say, and this is in relation to you and TaJ Talk and your team here, all the sponsors, everybody in this room, and everybody online that has personally helped me, and all of, you know, and Renee and everybody else around the world learn how to live safer. This is a phrase that we say all the time, and it's we are better together.
And we want to thank Jennifer and Beth. Give them a round of applause for helping all this to happen. And let us not forget Craig here at Sweet Pea Theater and their very nice showing coming up of Steel Magnolias, June 22nd through July 1st. And of course, we could not leave if we did not thank Adrian, Gustavo, Brother Terry, and Gio. These guys have been moving this whole thing along the whole time, and they've done a magnificent job. And of course, having you guys here. So we thank you all. Thank you for being a part of TaJ Talk, where we discuss Define Deliver. Thank you to all our guests. And if you have any ideas that you'd like to see on the platform, this is the people's platform, it's yours. Thank you, everyone. Good night.